Welcome to our podcast. In this episode, we chat with a distinguished professor of philosophy about the relevance of philosophical thoughts in today's world. Discover how timeless ideas shape our modern lives and inspire critical thinking. Join us for an engaging discussion that will spark your curiosity. We will be joined by Dr. Muzaffar Ali, currently Head Department of Philosophy, Islamic University of Science and Technology. He received MPhil and PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Prior to joining IUST, he served at Savitribai Phule Pune University and Hindu College, University of Delhi. He specializes in social and political philosophy and contemporary Indian philosophy with an emphasis on the idea of public sphere and its normative implications in the Indian context. People say that philosophy makes you to live, philosophy makes you to feel. Your consciousness is because of philosophy, because it's the moment you start thinking, you are behaving like a human being. Even Einstein, what he said that without philosophy, he would have contributed nothing. But there are certain physicists, one of the great physicists of our contemporary times, that's Neil deGrasse Tyson. He says philosophy is irrelevant, and actually, science has taken place, or scientific domain has simply shrinked the philosophical domain. There were certain questions which people were believing before 200 years, before 300 years, that these questions can be answered by philosophical inquiry. But science is actually overshadowing philosophy. We will discuss about these things with our young and energetic professor, who is associate professor at Islamic University of Science and Technology, Mr. Muzaffar Ahmad Mallah Sahab. We will discuss all these things with him, not even if at large, but we will try to make it a two-part podcast. In first part, we will see whether philosophy is having any relevance in modern times or not. The questions will be following later on. But before, I will request Professor Sahab to give an introduction about his department and particularly its opening in Islamic University. Professor Sahab.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you for coming and joining us here for the interaction. So, the Department of Philosophy at Islamic University of Science and Technology is the first postgraduate and research center or research space to be established in the Valley of Kashmir by Islamic University of Science and Technology. So it became a department last year, and last year we started our first postgraduate batch. So we have our first postgraduate batch, and admissions for the second batch are ongoing. So the need for having a Department of Philosophy is multifold. First is that one needs to be in know of one's traditional and philosophical heritage. And Kashmir has had a very strong compass of both philosophical inquiry as well as philosophical praxis. The philosophical inquiry being about aesthetics, for example, Abhinav Gupta's theory of aesthetics, and praxis being the Kashmiri version of Sufism. Kashmiri Sufism, what we call as. But unfortunately, I don't know what happened that there was no Department of Philosophy anywhere in the valley. And I'm really happy that the department is here. And with this, we'll not be able to just study philosophy, but the aim is to initiate our young minds into doing philosophy. And that's what our course, the MA program in philosophy, is all about. So we are not just teaching them so that they learn history of philosophy. We're engaging them into doing philosophy to try to conceptualize the contestations, the problems that our philosophy, that our society is confronting as of now, be it the problem of consumerism, be it the problem of commodity fetish, be it the problem of gender inequality, be it the problem of limits of knowledge, be it the vast problem of overconsumption, or there are many. The problems are many, but the initiative is to help students use this platform so that while pursuing MA, they can situate philosophy in the Kashmiri life world. Okay, so our focus is not just on Western philosophy, not just on Indian philosophy, not just on different philosophical traditions, but on contemporary philosophy. So we teach philosophers who are still alive, so that students come to know about the not just about the role of philosophy, but what philosophy is being done and what are the global discourses of philosophy, and how can we get some inspiration so that we can use them, utilize them, employ them to inform our own life.
Very nice. Thank you very much, sir. Even science, when it's at its abstract level, uses philosophy. For example, I may remind you of a great physicist, Werner Heisenberg. He was also compelled rather by his abstract thoughts which were arising in his mind to write philosophy or to tune philosophy with quantum mechanics. So at abstract level, you can have a mathematical structure trying to explain all the things, whatever is happening in the universe. Now people say Big Bang is not only the first event that occurred in the universe. There were so many Big Bangs. People come up with many theories. For example, Michio Kaku, the great contemporary physicist, he has came up with a string theory. Whatever the things are, but philosophy has got its catch in every field of science.
Yes.
That's what one biologist, Massimo Piuggi, when he sides with Einstein and says that importance of philosophy is in making true scientific progress. So we cannot simply deny the importance of philosophy. That's very true. But there are certain questions which actually compel us to ask these questions. So, sir, our first question goes that prominent thinkers like Daniel Dennett have suggested that philosophy has been overshadowed by the advancements in science. May it be in the field of quantum mechanics or especially in the field of cosmos and in the field of neurosciences. And he has suggested that, for example, in cognitive science and neuroscience, that the claim of philosophy that it was once upon a time our cup of tea, that claim has been somewhere thrashed away. So, sir, what are your claims about it?
So this is a very interesting claim, but I guess somehow what has happened is that like notable physicists mostly, so Stephen Hawking, you mentioned Neil Tyson, you mentioned Heisenberg, and some of them who still have contemporary, like who are contemporarily
Even
very
Roger
well received.
Penrose.
Yeah.
Even Roger Penrose.
So when they say that we have overtaken the job of philosophy, I think we are getting overawed by what they are saying. The question is not about overawing. For example, Neil Tyson, he is never trying to argue that philosophy is dead. He is trying to argue that there may be some other disciplines where philosophy is relevant. But as far as the nature of reality, understanding the nature of reality is concerned, it may have been the case that physics has taken the cap from philosophy, just because philosophers have not been able to keep
pace
with
with the advancement of
advancements in
science.
science.
Yes.
But there is one interesting thing, interesting way in which it can be understood. The wave of positivism somehow is understood to have proclaimed a kind of death, radical positivism, a death of philosophy. Okay, but somehow when we understand positivism that way, we try to understand it from the fact that there is nothing left for anything that's not science.
That's not science.
Isn't it? But we somehow also forget that no, that's not what these scientists are trying to claim. They are trying to say that this was something that philosophy had its claim on, and right now this may be the case that they no longer can do anything because they have not been able to keep pace, but there are still fields. Okay, there may be n number of fields where philosophy still has a very important role.
Okay, we will discuss about these fields, but
number two, and the second and important takeaway from this is that the discursive channels between science and philosophy are open. Had the discursive channels been snapped, no scientist will be talking about philosophy.
Okay, you see, this is at some time science and philosophy actually they were so interwoven that the seam was not visible.
Yeah.
But do you nowadays feel that they are separate entities and they cannot claim to enter into each other's domain, or they still can? And what are the fields in which philosophy has relevance?
See, as far as at the at its horizon, as far as we are concerned about its horizon, disciplinary wise, science and philosophy may seem to be completely different fields, but philosophy definitely has a say as far as the way science is developing, the developments within the evolution, the progress of science is concerned, the way science progress of science is happening is concerned. Philosophy definitely has a say, and that's why we have a dedicated philosophy of science subdiscipline within philosophy. Number one, this is something where philosophy has something to say about the way science is progressing. You may call it science is progressing in a blind manner. You may say that the applicability of science in the domain of technology is problematic. The philosophy of technology, etc., etc. That's
Isn't it that we are simply clinging philosophy to everything?
No, but this is necessary. It's not just that we have AI out there and it's all good about AI. There are questions, very relevant questions, which only philosophy is in a position to pose. The question of whether AI should be given rights.
But one thing is there, isn't it that it's the science itself which highlights its errors, which highlights its pros and cons? Then science itself decides which element is to be rectified or not. Then where is the role of a philosopher here?
That is the technical part of it.
Yes.
So science is right now engaged in the task of taking AI from AI to general AI.
Exactly.
So they are not interested in analyzing the questions, and it's not even the domain of science to figure out the ethical status of AI, to figure out the nature of rights that AI can claim, or to figure out whether AI should be given the status of an individual or a status of just a technology. These are questions that, with philosophy, only the disciplines of humanities and social sciences can tackle.
Well, we are not going to debate on this line. It may be like that, but there can be differences. Let's move to our next question. Is Thomas Nagel, in his work Mind and Cosmos, what he says is that contends that traditional philosophical questions may not yield answers within the scientific framework. Does this imply that philosophy is losing its grip on understanding the fundamental nature of reality?
This is a very interesting question, and it connects somehow to the first question as well. There's a very well-known documentary. It's titled by BBC. It's titled "Are We Born Good and Evil?"
Okay.
So somewhere in the beginning of 21st century, scientists, mostly neurobiologists, they tried to figure out whether there is a kind of moral molecule that determines whether we are going to act morally or immorally. So a person, a scientist whose name happens to be Robert here, was handed PET scans of people without knowing, without telling him that these are PET scans. So he figured that there's a pattern that all of them may be murderers and killers. And it was true. Then somehow he got to see his own PET scan, and he figured that his PET scan and the PET scans he was checking, they are of same pattern. But he was not a murderer.
He was not a murderer,
isn't it? So the claim of moral molecule
vanished.
It vanished in thin air.
Thin air, yes.
And while science was very close at having discovered a kind
good
of
molecule or a bad molecule,
so then he came to the conclusion was that it's not just genetics, but it is also about the conditioning of their genetics that plays a role in whether the person is going to be moral or not. Because Robert here came to the conclusion that it was also his upbringing in the social context that ended up. Okay, so the trigger has to be there. If there is a trigger, that trigger comes from society. Okay, so it's not that some things which science may happen to feel, or which we may happen to say that science will deal with them altogether. It's not the case.
Actually, what I have perceived, it's my own thought. I may be wrong, that at some time science, philosophy, and religion were deeply embedded. So anything philosophical was also a part of religious doctrine.
At least in the Eastern context.
At least in the Eastern. So does it mean that when there's a clash has started between science and religion, it's also a clash between philosophy and science?
So I think in the Eastern context, at least, the three happen to be intermingled. So in the Indian context, there's a huge scholarship out there which is trying to perceive the role of science uh, and interaction or the interface or the intersections between science and religion. Okay, but on the other hand, philosophy, be it the Islamic tradition, be it the Indian tradition, okay, both traditions have a way of seeking a higher reality, which happens to be also religious reality,
Exactly.
at least in some schools of these traditions, where the path may be philosophical, but the end point will be some sort of enlightenment, which may be, in the Indian context, we may call it nirvana, we may call it moksha, and in the Islamic concept, we may call it marifa, we may call it hakiki zindagi, etc. So the kind of intersection between religion and philosophy that we see in Eastern context has been somehow hyperboled. Okay, it has been hyperboled to the extent that religion and philosophy are almost considered as one.
As one.
But that's not the case. So contemporary Indian philosophers like Daya Krishna, like B.K.
There are many
Matilal,
atheist philosophers also.
like B.K. Matilal, like Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay, they are trying to argue that spiritualism or religion may be one aspects of Eastern philosophies, but it is not the only one.
It's not the only one.
It's not the only one. And when we try to hyperbole it as being the only one, maybe we are succumbing to a colonial reading of Eastern philosophies. Maybe we are succumbing to the Orient-Occident divide. Maybe we are succumbing in another way to the first world, third world divide. Or maybe we are even succumbing, I'm sorry for using this word, maybe we are succumbing to a kind of epistemic totalitarianism, where the West thinks that the way that has been treaded by the West is the only way to seek truth.
Yes.
In a similar way, science is also at times trying to argue that the scientific way is the only way. So this is another kind of epistemic totalitarianism, but it is too too bad to be considered as a position that scientific way is the only way.
You see, scientific way, we can say that it's not the only way, or even science never claims like that. But still, science has got some empirical evidence.
Yeah.
Whereas philosophy is simply your dialogues, your thoughts, which can even not be generalized. I don't remember the name of the philosopher who said that no philosopher agrees on a single point.
Yeah.
So that's why the tendency of science is altogether different from the tendency of a philosopher or philosophy. And secondly, science, whatever it says or whatever it claims, it has got a part of proof which philosophy lacks. What are your views?
But that is not the way philosophy is done, because philosophy has originally never sought to universalize its applicability.
But you see the spirituality, you see, which is connected with philosophy.
Yeah.
There are simple self-experiences which can never be generalized.
Yeah, isn't it? So even other than spirituality, so when we talk about Plato, for example, when Plato writes Republic, he's entrenched into the Athenian life world. He's not concerned about whether it would be applicable to the entire world, isn't it? That's where philosophy is contextualized. It will, or it may or may not have a bearing on other life worlds. It may or may not have a bearing on other contexts, but that has originally never been a philosopher's beginning impetus. Quite contrary, a scientist's impetus is always to come up with something which is necessarily going to have universal applicability. Had that not been the case, then we would always be ending up with a homogeneous philosophy.
Okay, that's very true. But what are ethics and what's evil? Is evil something universal? How do we define evil in philosophical way?
So, see, if we try to consider evil from a social perspective, then anything that is not following the norms and certain setups that are established either traditionally, either culturally, or either in a communitarian way by the society, which somehow is an aberration to it, we deem it evil. And there is a lot of work by Foucault and Foucauldians later that somehow this normal debate only enters our perspective after modernity, because modernity somehow feels that the mentally unstable people are no longer productive. So since they are unproductive, let there be an asylum for them. Criminals, since they are not following the code of conduct that a society follows, so let there be a prison for them, isn't it? Or since some people they have become old and they are no longer productive, let there be an old age home for them. Okay, this is one way of understanding it.
Fine.
This is a social way of understanding it. Then, when we next move to the religious perspective, the religious way in which evil is, the issue is that usually most of the religions, they have almost very clear-cut boundaries of what is good
And what's
what is
bad?
bad, what is halal,
What is
is
haram?
haram, what is pap, what is punya, isn't it? And anything which does not follow the uh, the structure of that religion, the non-evil structure of that religion, is usually considered evil. But here, one important fact and one important factor that usually most of us miss is that at many times the cultural and religious, they intervene.
They intermingle.
They intermingle with each other, and most often puritarian fundamentalists, they don't like it.
They don't like it. But from what you say is that I can simply deem it out that even evil then is a relative entity.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a relative entity. So let's come to our next question. Despite these critics, many argue that philosophical inquiry remains vital, especially in addressing ethical dilemma brought about by technology and globalization.
Yeah.
What you were earlier telling.
Yeah. So it's not just about globalization or technology. It's also about the progress of human civilization. Okay. So the progress of human civilization is unfortunately not just technological progress. It's also about the social and historical progress. So every time a society moves on, progresses, there are going to be new challenges. That's why, if justice was an important concept for early Indian philosophers, for Plato, isn't it? For the beginners of Islamic philosophy, it's an important concept for us as well, because there is no end, or there is no one size fits all perspective of justice. Had that not been the case, then John Rawls in 1971 would not have written a theory of justice again. Okay, so in a similar way, technology it's just because technology has a very huge impact, has a very huge penetration into our life, that we only tend to underline the technological questions that philosophy can deal with. But philosophy has to deal also with questions about what can count as knowledge now. What are the limits of knowledge now? Because uh, maybe at the beginning of 20th century, knowledge was limited by the working technicalities of printing press.
Fine.
But right now, what circulates around in the public domain is not limited by the working technicalities of printing press. It's just our phones.
Exactly. It's in our
lot of
pocket
things.
now. Yes.
So it does not remain limited to being a technological problem. It becomes an epistemological problem.
Exactly.
So similarly, ethically, for example, maybe during the time of Plato, we would talk about an ethics that is limited to physical interchanges of people. So that's why Aristotle in Nicomachean Ethics, if I am able to remember correctly, he says that reciprocal justice doesn't serve my purpose, because if a slave does wrong and his master slaps him, there is no way that the slave can slap the master back. So there's no way that reciprocal justice. We have to talk about justice in some other terms.
Exactly.
So this is only about physical people interacting. But right now, anything can happen in the cyberspace. Okay, so while it is a technological problem, it's a deeply ethical problem as well.
It's a deeply so fine. The case is also with genetic cloning, and there are so many scientific things where people think that we should put a full stop. So we will be discussing other questions with Professor Sahab, but definitely in our next episode. Thank you very much.